So in March 2004, that was the most unpleasant time, those 2.5 days, because there was shooting in the streets, there was ransacking of the flats of unmixed staff, people were getting killed. The March riots 2004 were disturbing, deeply disturbing. From unmixed perspective, everything that they had been working for years, standards before status, getting people to understand what had to be done in order for Kosovo to impress the international community sufficiently to say, yes, okay, let's move on and resolve Kosovo's status. All that was just flushed down the drain with a series of incidents, manipulation of public opinion and through RTK, but also in the print media. The failure of KFOR due to the different national what do they call them? Not paradigms. Anyway, the contingents each had their own set of rules for engagement, and some performed extremely well, and some contingents proved wholly inadequate. A lot of people got hurt, and some people died. We tend to forget just how many people were killed and under what circumstances. We also tend to forget what led up to it. It didn't just happen out of nowhere. And I don't mean the incidents in the immediate 48 hours beforehand, but the general public mood, for which UNMIK was also partially to blame, but even more so the contact group for not being open in already having the issue of Kosovo's future status on the table since September 2003. But it never leaked out. Because the SRSG at the time, when these talks were held in New York, and who attended the first half of the talks, which was on dialogue, stood up when the second item on the agenda, Kosovo's future status, came up, and he said, that's not part of my mandate. Incorrectly, in my view. He should have reread 1244, but I assume he was told by people at DPKO, you don't attend that part of the meeting. That was unwise. So that was left up to the contact group. They didn't leak. And people had the impression that nothing was happening, nothing was moving forward. Not too much was spontaneous, I suspect, in March. There are still many unanswered questions. Who was behind the killing of a 15-year-old Serbian boy in Čaglavica in a drive-by shooting? That then touched off the roadblocks by the Serbs on the main road between Prishtinë and Ferizaj, and also on the main road through Gračanica on to Gjilan. That evening or the next day I think were the drownings near Chabra in the Ibar of the children. What really happened there? Who led the crowd across the Austerlitz bridge to North Mitrovica into a hail of gunfire? There was a lot of madness, and there was a lot of calculation. If you look at where the largest number of clashes, serious clashes, and burnings of homes occurred, the specific parts of neighborhoods, Czaglavica and Fushkosov's Kosovo-Polje, Serb neighborhoods, that were Serb neighborhoods then, and then within a year or two were bought up by Albanian speculators, including politicians, for development, transforming these neighborhoods either into, as in Fushkosov, Kosovo-Polje, high-rise apartment buildings and commercial properties, or suburban developments and commercial stores in Czaglavica. That paints a rather nasty picture. That this was not spontaneous, that this was about, in the end, speculation, kicking out the Serbs to create a situation more amenable to buying up property and making a fast buck, as it were. Some of these properties then were built over for highways, but in the meantime there were politicians and others who had bought up land and then were able to sell at a significant profit, or be bought out by the state when the highway was built, the Skopje Road, etc. So that aspect, but I mean the fear aspect of course, you're walking down the street and there's shooting and you can't get home because it's too dangerous and you have to find a substitute place on the way to spend the night. That's no fun, that's no joke. But that's minor compared to people losing their lives and their homes for the speculative interests of certain people, certain individuals.
Yeah, I understand. More Albanians died in 2004 than Serbs.
Yes, yes, but look, the total number was 21 people killed, two of whom died several days afterwards. That was an elderly Serbian couple who were burnt severely in their homes and then died in hospital subsequently. That raises another question which I can come to. Yes, more Albanians died, but why? Under what circumstances? They were led across the bridge into a hail of gunfire. Who led them in North Mitrovica, from South Mitrovica to North Mitrovica? Who was that? Why weren't those people ever brought to justice? No one raises those questions. That's my problem. Yes, they died. What were they thinking in crossing over to the north? Did they assume that the bridge watchers who had been causing so many problems since '99 were simply going to stand by and allow them to walk into it? Sorry. And the guy in Novo Selo who was shot by an American policewoman who saw him advancing on Novo Selo with his pistol out, and she said, "Put that gun down," presumably only in English, presumably didn't understand, but she was in uniform and he ignored her and she shot him. Well, she was an American policewoman. I mean, yes, more Albanians died. Serbs who died, I don't know how many of them died with a gun in their hands, I don't know. The total number of deaths, then 21. The total number of church properties, 30 or so, 31. That's all very, very serious. The total number of people injured is far more. The total number of, we never talk about the Kosovo police officers, the UNMIK police officers, and the KFOR soldiers who were injured. And those numbers combined are close to 200. And when you raise that with Kosovo academics or politicians, they make out like this, I've never heard of this before. It's been published, it's on the internet, it's the UNMIK report to the Security Council from the end of April, I believe, 2004, on the violence. It's all there, but we only focus on more Albanians died than Serbs. That's really boiling it down to, that's not the point. The point is 21 people died pointlessly. How many millions have been made as, what sort of profits have come out of of this incident, these 2.5 days of senseless violence.
Well, you're raising the bridge. There's never been any really law and order enforced in North Mitrovica. There are about 1,600 Albanians who had to flee. This is before your time, in 2000, when there were pogroms against Albanians in the north. There has never been any really success. That must have been, it's frustrating, I guess, for everybody that there is this division there, and the north is completely ethnically cleansed from the war, or almost ethnically cleansed. That must have been a frustrating
Of course it was.
for Almec. How do you handle the north?
Well, they have there's an office in the north, and there are offices in all the municipalities it's in Leposavic, Zubin Potok, and Zviceran, as well as North Mitrovica. And Almec was vilified by the Serbs in the north until Kosovo declared independence, at which point they made a 180-degree turn and wrapped themselves up in the UN flag, hoisted the UN flag next to the Serbian flag, and then we became their great protectors, in their view. But until then, there was no love lost between us. It was as bad as the relationship subsequently was with ULEX.
We talk about your most difficult moment. What is the most frustrating moment? Or what was the most frustrating activity for you as a UN official in these 14 years?
I would say that since 2011, 12 at the latest, the mission, this raison d'etre, has ceased to exist. 1244 has been fulfilled. Serbia is perfectly capable of sitting down at the table with Kosovo without a UN representative present. All of the items laid out in 1244 of what UNMIC's tasks are have been fulfilled. What are we doing here? Why do we hear such a contradictory set of stories at every Security Council session, with the Russians and the Serbs and sometimes other states that they've persuaded to speak up, describing a situation here that bears little relationship to reality? That's frustrating. The fact that because Resolution 1244 is open-ended, UNMIC may be here for decades to come because there's no exit strategy. There was a false assumption, but they were so worried, or the Americans were so worried in '99 that if they allowed the council to renew on an annual basis, at some point Milosevic would persuade the Russians or someone else to veto, and it would be all over. And so we're here to stay. Or they are. I'm not.
And what is the funniest thing that or the funniest moment, or the funniest thing you've done, or you've experienced? There must have been some.
That's a question I didn't expect. Funniest.
Surreal.
Yeah, surreal. Surreal was Ban Ki-moon's visit. That was surreal. We saw just yesterday, I believe, how the news media covered Donald Trump flying directly from Saudi Arabia to Israel. Well, it's not too different when it comes to flying, Ban Ki-moon flying directly from Belgrade to Prishtinë. But for reasons of weather, and there were no storms, his plane was routed via Skopje. He then had a whirlwind trip of a few hours, and our protocol person had made sure everything was correct and in line with status neutrality for his meeting with President Yahyaga at Prishtinë airport immediately before his departure. And they sealed the room so that no one could meddle with it. And so then Ban Ki-moon was brought into the room. In the meantime, someone had meddled with it, and he stood in front of a portrait of Adam Yoshari on one side and a reproduction of the Declaration of Independence on the other side, and had his photograph taken, unaware of what was going on behind him, and the protocol guy nowhere in sight, apparently. And all I could say was, all the king's horses and all the king's men. I mean, this was a case of Humpty Dumpty. No matter how much you prepare and try to make sure that things are going to be the way you present it as you want to, obviously you're not on your own turf and you're going to be outsmarted. My comment about all the king's men on Facebook provoked an overheated response by one politician who shall be remain nameless, but who is no longer a Facebook friend, who saw neither the comedy nor the irony in this. Irony is a concept, I'm afraid to say, that is not well understood by the overwhelming majority of people in this part of the world, regardless of ethnicity or mother tongue. And so there was anger rather than amusement.
And actually, I want to ask you, you worked here for so long, and you're making the distinction between being a journalist and being a UN official. What changed in your relationship with the local? There are these two categories, international locals, in Kosovo, and I guess in all other missions. Did anything change, and how would you characterize your relationship with the locals?
Well, the first problem was my relationship with the locals didn't change. I am who I am. Those who knew me before accepted me for who I am. The bigger problem was with my UN colleagues, for whom it took years, and some never were able to see me as anything but a journalist who couldn't be trusted, who was going to spill the beans one way or another. And I remember being actually taken aside within the first week or two by my supervisor, one of my supervisors, a German diplomat, and said, you're not a journalist anymore. I hope you're not going to, what you heard in that room, you're not going to. I said, no, why would I do that? However, that said, information is a valuable commodity in a closed society or in an unusual society like this one, which is under international administration. And if we UNMIK were to, in those days, if we were going to be fully in the picture of what was going on, yes, in addition to reading the newspapers very carefully and between the lines, in addition to maintaining contacts with politicians and their advisors, I also maintain contacts with a few journalists, though I must say extremely few, because the vast majority really didn't understand the basics in those days of confidentiality. And if you told them anything, your name appeared in print and everything was there. There was no way to, on background, etc. But those who worked for local journalists who worked for international media, yeah, if they had a question and they weren't going to get a straight answer from the UNMIK Office of Public Information or whatever it was called, it's changed its name so many times, they could call me and I could tell them what I knew, the extent that there was something, and vice versa. I could ask them questions because they had insights which I didn't have, particularly during the March violence, where they had people all over, and I didn't. I mean, we had people, but we weren't getting the kind of reporting we needed, because the people who were in the field were working for the Department of what was it called in those days? Pillar 2, Civil Administration, and they were very close with their information. That went straight to the SRSG. None of it came to the Office of Political Affairs, so I really didn't get any field reports. I didn't know what was going on for some time in the field. I only got that through journalistic contacts, and I told them what I was seeing within the mission. And they didn't betray confidentiality or abuse the information. It worked in a perfectly responsible, mature manner.
Would there be any instance in which you can say, I have succeeded in doing something? Because, okay, you said in general,
Yeah.
the AMIC fulfill its mandate with, problems you have expressed your...
Yeah, I think 14 years is a very long time. And the last few years, there hasn't been much opportunity. Because what are we doing? What responsibility do we really have, other than trying to portray ourselves as something that we no longer are? So in recent years, no. Beyond warning the UN in New York and in Prishtinë that attempts to reassert ourselves in certain fields, such as rule of law, is not going to work, that it's misguided. It's serving particular special interests, careerism of certain individuals. It is going to get very strong blowback by the government. This isn't Mali, this isn't Haiti, and this is a state that doesn't want to do anything that would in any way undermine its own sense of sovereignty. So, yeah, I was basically shushed or ignored, but I was proven correct. So there was some satisfaction that. I think I had much more day-to-day influence in the era of the EU SRSGs than in the era of the Afghan SRSGs. Specific instances over the years, I mean, it's all, I have to go back over my notes, but yes, there were cases, there were a variety of things, whether it was involved in dialogue, whether it was involved in being on the Central Election Commission, whether it was involved in how to report issues to New York, what detail to add, to convey the full picture, what advice to give an SRSG in advance of meeting with officials here or in Belgrade or visiting officials from elsewhere. Yes, certainly.
Well, obviously the UN thought that you were valuable here because you knew the place. Do you think that for a peacekeeper, for someone involved in this kind of work, is it important to know the place well, or it might actually be beneficial to take a fresh look?
Works both ways. You can't expect everyone to be in the know. You have to understand the context, otherwise you're doomed to make big mistakes. And to understand the context, it means reading in, as they say in journalism. You really have to be up to date on everything that transpired in the past. You need to know the context. If you don't know the context, if you don't know why we're here, and why we're still here, and why we really shouldn't be here, then you may be wasting your time and the time of a lot of others. You really have to understand where we've come from, what we're really trying to achieve here now, and why we're still here.
So it's not just a question of who you are, but how much you're prepared to face the situation. You were making comments about, you work for different SRSGs, I mean all of them, right? And almost.
7. I worked for 7, but no, I didn't work for the first 3.
Okay, so you work for 7 SRSGs. So can you tell us something about the difference among them? What worked or what didn't work in terms of how well prepared they were, where they were coming from to face this mission, which is kind of complicated.
Yeah. Okay. Those nominated by EU member states, all except the last two, had multiple masters. Their capitals, Brussels and New York. They were at times irritated by what some perceived as micromanagement by New York. They were on the phone constantly with their capitals, whether it was Rome or Berlin or Copenhagen or Helsinki, and with Brussels. And that complicated matters for them and for running the mission and for headquarters in understanding what was going on here and getting uncomfortable with the material that they were being fed. Kofi Annan, as Secretary General, had appointed people who he felt were suitable for different phases of the mission. He needed a humanitarian initially, then he needed someone with some sort of a military background. So first it was, the first two were humanitarians. Then the third, Hekkerup, had been defense minister in Denmark. Then he had a national security guy after 9/11, Michael Steiner, who had been German Chancellor's national security advisor. Then Ban Ki-moon came on the scene, and we had, and there was still Holkeri, because the former prime minister, because Kofi Annan allegedly wanted a statesman in this post after Steiner. But then came Ban Ki-moon, and we saw Jesper Petersen, who was someone from within the UN, but UNHCR, a humanitarian, who thought with his heart, also when making political decisions, which was his undoing, followed by Joachim Rücker, who was a political technocrat, former mayor, holding various senior posts in the German Foreign Ministry, who had been head of the EU reconstruction pillar, so he already had a couple of years here. He did not come blindly here, just as Steiner had worked as a deputy high representative in Sarajevo, so he also had experience in the region, if not in Kosovo. Jesper Petersen had also been head of UNHCR office in Skopje. Lamberto Zagner was an arms negotiator, but also had run an OSCE office on minorities, I think. And was a diplomat. And that was then the end of the EU interest and insistence on having a finger on UNMIK, or in UNMIK, because they figured, well, you know, there's ULEX and there's the EUSR's office, so, you know, we don't really need UNMIK anyway. Everyone made that same mistake, including the Russians, when they pulled out their most senior person here and moved him to Ahtisaari's office. They all miscalculated that UNMIK was just going to fizzle away. So we've had two Afghan SRSGs. The first, who had worked for more than 20 years within the UN system when he started at UNMIK. So he knew the system inside and out, which has its benefits, but also potential pitfalls. And the current SRSG, also an Afghan, who was his country's permanent rep in New York for 7 years and chaired the Committee on Reform of the Security Council, so he knows the UN structures well, even if he didn't initially know how to work the system. He does by now.
I want to ask you, how would you say, how How well do you know Kosovo now, after 14 years?
It's an enigma. This is, how well, I mean, based on what? I can make myself understood. My Albanian is bad because I'm in an English-speaking bubble here. Enough people speak English or German or Serbian or whatever, I can get by. I have had good local staff, advisors, colleagues who've kept me in the picture as to how things function here. When I first came here, I traveled around a lot more. The higher up you move in a system, the more distant others below you become, and you're also told, look, the last thing you want to do is make friends within the system, and they keep you at arm's distance. I found, I was inviting people to dinner all the time, and I like to cook and bake, but I wasn't getting invited anywhere. And was it because I was too intimidating in what I could produce, or too intimidating intellectually, or just too intimidating, period, by my rank? I don't know. Maybe all three. But so I felt somewhat isolated in that respect. This is, as I put it in a speech that Holkery delivered back in 2003 or 4, early 2004, it is a backwater. It was certainly in the Yugoslav era, and in the scale of things even in the region. I mean, this is a province. It's only been independent for 9 years, and it never had any history of independence. It doesn't have, and it's only starting to have, an internationally trained political elite, but because the politicians who really hold power have limited international experience in terms of education, and do everything to keep those who have that at a certain distance or out of the picture entirely. And that is changing, but it's changing far too slowly. There is this town versus gown, or Katunar versus Qytetar aspect that still hasn't been overcome. I mean, one could be very snide and say this is a republic of Katunars, but that's not fair, and that's an oversimplification. But the same would be true in Serbia and Bulgaria and Montenegro and Albania and Bosnia, etc. I mean, this is a problem of the region, and it is a legacy of, it's an Ottoman legacy, it's a legacy of the socialist era, etc. And growing out of that is something that takes generations. That's something that doesn't get resolved by a UN mission, peacekeeping mission, putting things in shape in a couple of years.
But I have an impression from story that you told me, for what I know about you, that you know Kosovo so well, you practically have walked everywhere.
No. There are corners of Kosovo I still haven't hiked or even driven through. They're not a lot, but I mean, there are places. I've never taken the back roads from Lukare to Kamenica. Maybe I have some of them, but basically back in eastern Kosovo towards the Serbian border, that's terra incognita for me, in part because it's so sparsely populated and the roads until recently were really bad, and I never had a reason to be there.
But you've done everything else.
There are plenty of corners that I would have liked to have hiked that I haven't gotten into. Mountains I would have liked, I've been looking at for a long time, would have liked to go up that I've never gone up. Trouble spots that I avoided so as not to find myself in trouble along the Macedonian border, east of Hanjelezid, up on this side of Tanushevci. And the same goes for certain parts of Macedonia behind Tetovo, up in the hills, Vates and those places. But yeah, generally, I know where to go if I want to have a nice day out hiking. I know the most beautiful spots in Kosovo, and there's still a few I haven't been able to get into because to get up to some of these, you really need to plan, unless you're going to bring along a tent, because roads will not get you there. You know, you have to get yourself there on your own 2 feet, and you probably can't do the whole thing there and back in one day. And I'm not a camper at this age, so.
If you don't mind something more personal, you were mentioning a wife. You have a wife in.
Yeah, my wife. All right. Well, I got married in 1991 to a Czech architect, and we had one daughter, and we separated in 2002, the year before I came here. And when I mentioned that to my boss shortly after arriving, he said, yeah, well, a lot of people are in the same situation you are. And what I years later heard was that UNMIK really stands for unmarried in Kosovo. So yeah, I was essentially single here for years. And that also gave me a certain insight. And I still get insights into the lives of Kosovo women. Being a foreigner is not necessarily a plus. I mean, I've heard many women say, oh, I'll never marry a Kosovo man. Kosovo women saying this. But I also heard from one person, okay, she was from an Albanian from southern Serbia, who said, yeah, well, it would make my parents very sad. I said, what? I haven't proposed anything beyond your spending the night. And she said, well, I mean, they would immediately assume, you know, that we would leave, and who would look after the farm, or the house, this, that. I said, you know, I never raised the issue. I simply asked you why you want to spend the night, you know, and it would make, because her sister would find out, who would tell the parents, and you know, this is a very closed society, very tight family bonds, and if anyone, heaven forbid, found out that you were having something with an American, the assumption is that marriage and you move to America. Well, I lived out of America for 36 years. So that's one little episode. But I can say I go to Pilates 3 to 5 evenings a week. And sometimes, other than the instructor, I'm the only man in the room. And the women range in age from mid-20s to late 60s. They generally, the Kosovo Albanian women, who make up 95% of the women, occasionally there are some internationals there. But the Albanian women, they either look straight through me as if I don't exist, regardless of whether I have a ring on or not. There is no attempt, unless they've lived for a long time abroad, particularly in the United States, then they'll talk. I don't think it's a language problem. I don't think it's shyness. It's just they don't want to go there. I don't know. It's just, they're not wearing veils. They're wearing 3 T-shirts so that this you don't have a clue. But you know, it's a strange experience. And yet, any West European or East European or North American or Latin American who goes into that environment, female, has no problem starting a conversation or having a conversation with me, saying hello, goodbye. There's nothing, there's no greeting. They see me coming up the street and they're coming from the opposite direction. We're headed to the same door. There's no recognition, acknowledgement, anything. And these are generally intelligent women. I mean, they're you know, from the chattering classes, from the ruling classes, they don't communicate. There's no eye contact. There's nothing. It is. I find it I don't find it insulting. I mean, it's their problem, not mine. But I find it, in this day and age, odd. But okay, you know, we're not in America. I don't think that I'm that old. And I've only been doing Pilates for 4 years, but it's strange. I mean, I can count the number of Albanian women with whom I have said anything more than hello there on the finger, on maybe maybe one finger, in 4 years.
But it's okay, because now you're married.
Yes. I've been saved, as it were, by an old friend who I knew from before I started coming to Kosovo, also Czech, an ethnologist focused on the indigenous peoples of Siberia, central Siberia, but who works as an editor-in-chief of a magazine on healthy alternative living, and has been here with me for the last nearly 2 years, editing, thanks to the intermittent services of IPCO, able to function from here. So my life has changed a little. I don't get out to hike as much as I used to. I'm in better shape than I used to be thanks to the Pilates. But she's here with her 2 kids from her first marriage, and so kids of a certain age are not very eager to hop in the car and spend the day. I was as a child, but they're not anyway. So we don't do quite as much traveling as I would like. But they're happy with the international school that the kids are attending here, and I doubt they'll get as good an education back in Prague when we return.
And they're making friends, right?
They're making friends, yeah.
Just the last question. Now you're leaving now to go back to the Czech Republic, Prague. Do you leave friends here?
Of course.
Behind?
Of course. People I've worked with for 14 years who I trust, who I like, who I respect. Others who I haven't worked with, but who I came to know since I moved here, who I'll miss, of course, and who I'll stay in touch with thanks to Facebook, you know, so they'll know where I am, I'll know where they are, and if I ever am back in these parts, I'm sure we'll see each other again. I'm not leaving Kosovo with hard feelings. I didn't leave the UN 3 weeks ago with hard feelings. I reached the mandatory retirement age for people hired before 2014 of 62. I'm out. I knew that when I got hired. I never thought I'd stay this long. All good things have to come to an end. I don't know how many more Prishtinë winters or Obilic winters I could survive if I were to stay. If I was offered to stay on till I was 65, I probably wouldn't take it, because the winter, the air quality here is going from bad to worse between November and February.
And is there anything else you want to add that I didn't ask, or that you think you care to say?
Nothing that hits me. I'm sure as soon as I walk out the door, there'll be 20 things that'll occur to you and to me. But look, this is a society that has been victimized through the centuries, over the last century, and continues to be. And free elections, parties, etc., there's still, you know, party politics anywhere are problematical, and Kosovo is no exception. I'm often asked whether I'm here or in any other country, you know, who would you vote for? What party would you vote for? And my answer is always, I'm so glad I'm not in that position that I have to make that decision. I've been asked here by people in the NGO sector who wanted to enter politics what I thought about their founding their own party, and this it's been going on since I started here. And my advice was, find a party that's at least close to what you think, that you can work within to change things. Founding your own party is the fastest way to bankruptcy. You don't, unless you have the kind of money Pazzoli has, you can't afford to do that. So think again. And that was my advice to Enver Hoxha, and to my surprise he chose PDK. That's been my advice to various other people who ended up jumping on the Vettvendosje bandwagon. If they can change it from within, good luck. We haven't even discussed Vettvendosje. So,
Should we?
No. I think the less I say about them, I'm not going to say anything that 100 other people haven't already said before, I suspect.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.